Welcome everyone to the Dragon Age Veilguard Specializations ranking. If you're new to the channel, I have a nightmare build on the channel for every single specialization in the game, and I will place them in the description if one appeals to you. I currently have clocked in around 300 hours in the game on Nightmare, so I have quite a lot of experience with everything to do with this game. This specialization ranking will be a lot like my Inquisition specialization rankings, where I give points to each class for 3 primary factors. Those being thematic, power, and fun. All of these scores are added up to give us a champion. Obviously this list is very subjective as fun is different for everyone, and power is not the end-all be-all for the list. For example, what I consider to be the 3 strongest specializations in the game are actually ranked at 3, 5, and 7 respectively. Before I get into the list, I would like you all to comment down below what your number 1 class in the game is. Now with all of that out of the way, let's get into the rankings. At number 9, we have Veil Ranger. This is the only easy decision on this entire list. I really think BioWare hit it out of the park with the combat and class design in this game, but Veil Ranger was very much left behind. It feels like in order to get this class going, you have to put in twice the work for half of the payoff. It's very much not a satisfying class to play for more than 2 hours. Sure, it's fun for a little while maxing out damage with headshots and feeling like Robin Hood, but the playstyle becomes tiring after a while, and the payoff is just not there. The thematic of the class is also just very weak. The electric arrow abilities hardly feel strong most of the time compared to the other abilities in the game, and the idea of being a Veil Ranger just doesn't really feel any different than a normal archer in any other RPG. This class feels like one that was left behind by the pace of the game and unfortunately lands itself firmly in the last place spot. Now that that is over, we can finally talk about the real specializations. All of them from here on out range from decent to great designs, and can easily dominate Nightmare with the right build, but some of them are just better than others. At number 8, we have the Slayer. Slayer is the red-headed stepchild of the warrior class in this game. Everything that you want to do is just done better by both Slayer and Champion. For me, the best way to describe Slayer would be the word dull. The gameplay is dull, and your weapon also sure feels like it. Using a two-hander in this game feels quite bad in my opinion. The sword and shield outclass it significantly both in terms of feel and power. So with that being said, the entire class being designed around two-handed attacks and slow spells just leads to it being one of the least powerful and exciting subclasses in the game. You will notice a common theme at the bottom of this list, and that theme is that they all play the game very slowly. In this new age of Dragon Age, where it is much more about action than strategy, the fast-paced classes are both stronger and more fun to play. At number 7, we have Deathcaller. I don't necessarily dislike Deathcaller, but I have 2 major gripes that bring it down significantly. First, we'll talk about the big one. The thematic. I don't like the Dragon Age idea that making abilities green and giving them lifesteal suddenly makes them into an undead god. How is shooting things with a laser beam a Deathcaller? This is a problem I've had with Dragon Age undead mage builds for a while now. I think they completely failed to deliver on the class fantasy of a necromancer class. We even had Emmerich Manfred teasing us the entire game with the fact that we will never have any undead pals to summon to do our bidding. This would have been 100 times more interesting than shooting things with a laser beam. Which brings us to the second point, which is fun. Now I'll be the first to admit, gunning things down with a lawnmower laser beam was stupidly fun. For about an hour. Then things got a little monotonous. Watching things evaporate into mist after being touched for 2 seconds was pretty hilarious and is borderline broken. But that's pretty much the one saving grace for this class. This spec is basically just an overpowered version of the Veil Ranger. At number 6, we have the Evoker. I know, we already have 2 mage specs in the bottom 4. How could I? And what I will say is that mage is incredibly boring and weak for the first 30 hours of this game before you become strong. It's pretty much unheard of for mages to get the short end of the stick in Dragon Age, but I think this is the closest they have come, and I already know some of you are in the comments section smashing away at your keyboard, letting everyone know how Evoker is the best specialization in the game. But unfortunately, we are talking about Dragon Age and not World of Warcraft, so that is just not the case. Like I previously mentioned before all of the classes, outside of Veil Ranger are very competitive and enjoyable, so don't take it as a personal attack. For me personally though, Evoker is just too slow of a playstyle. Much like Veil Ranger and Slayer, it just doesn't feel like it keeps up with the speed of the game. Yes, it's very easy to unleash a giant ball of doom that deletes all of the enemies, but in that same time frame, I could have done that with every other class in front of it on this list as well, and already have moved on to the next pack of enemies, while also having more engaging gameplay. Additionally, comparatively to its other specialization siblings in the mage tree, it just isn't even as strong or fun as either of them in my opinion. One thing I will say however is that I do think the thematic of the specialization is done very well, and you truly do feel like a god of ice. On to number 5. We actually have a 3-way tie between Duelist, Spellblade, and Reaper. So I just put them in the order of how likely I am to play them on future playthroughs. So that brings us to Reaper. Now this might be the shocker of the list to most of you, and honestly it was a shocker to myself when I sat down and was making this list. But it's true. The other 4 above it in this list to me are simply better all around specializations. More fun, better thematics, and roughly similar in power. Which brings us to Reaper's biggest strength, and that is its power. Reaper is incredibly strong. You could argue it is the strongest specialization from minute 1 until you finish the game at hour 70. And I really do not disagree. If you're new to the game and just want the easiest nightmare run possible, then I heavily recommend going with Reaper. And then if you decide you don't like it, you can easily just respec into another fantastic specialization that we'll be going over further down the list. Being able to launch your shield into a group of enemies and ping pong it off their heads and one-shot everything was also pretty fun. But much like Deathcaller, that fun only really lasts for a little while. Then, the gameplay eventually becomes pretty boring and unengaging to me personally. This is a primary reason why it placed in the middle of the list. Coming in 4th place, we have Duelist. This was the first specialization I played, of which I have the entire playthrough on the channel. Duelist is a super fun class, fun gameplay, strong and thematically done very well. All around, a very well-rounded specialization. One of the common traits you can notice amongst the top 4 is that they are all very malleable. They can all use a ton of different abilities and equipment to whatever suits your playstyle, which I think is super valuable for not only fun, but also the replayability of the game. Duelist is no different. You can go with a few different variations of necrotic builds, bleed builds, physical builds, or as seen on the first Veilguard build video on my channel, you can go with a hybrid cold build. BioWare also did a very good job of making you truly feel like a duelist. The ability 1000 Cuts is done very well, and in combination with parrying and dodging, you really do feel like you are a duelist dancing around the battlefield. The one gripe I have with the class is that the endgame of the specialization kinda feels like it revolves around hard abusing immunity frames with 1000 Cuts. I just don't feel like that kind of gameplay is very engaging for long periods of time, which did bring it down a few notches. As mentioned previously, at number 3 we have Spellblade, the highest placing mage build on the list. The reason this is the highest placing mage build is primarily 2 big reasons. Number 1 is that it is probably the strongest specialization in the entire game after you hit the mid to late game. Early game, as with all mage builds, isn't the best, but once you acquire a couple of pieces of key equipment, you can quickly assemble Exodia and beat the game with your eyes closed. If you're curious what that looks like, I have 2 Spellblade builds on the channel, Rain of Fire and Archmage, that both showcase this specialization to its fullest potential. The second reason it's the highest placing mage build is because I think during the early stages, the Orb and Dagger is much more engaging to use than the staff, and the class is much more malleable, giving you a ton of options on how you would like to make your build, providing a more interesting early game experience. The one reason the specialization is lower than both Champion and Saboteur is simply because those specializations both have engaging gameplay for the entire game, and while feeling like a god is very fun, I personally find it more fun to have an engaging endgame. For those of you that read the comments and watch all of my videos, you likely already know who is in first, which brings us to our silver medalist, the Saboteur Rogue. When I was originally making this list, I did not expect Saboteur to place this high. But when I actually thought about it, there is not one weakness to Saboteur Rogue. It is very powerful, very fun, and thematically does a great job of making you feel like a pirate bombardier with its mixture of explosives, tools, defenses, range, and melee. Saboteur Rogue pretty much has a tool for every situation in the game, and that means that you can build it in a ton of different ways to whatever suits your playstyle. My personal favorite way to build it is with nearly infinite explosive throwing knives, which if you've ever played Dragon Age Inquisition, you may be very familiar with. It's not as strong as the throwing knife builds in Inquisition, but it is still quite good and very fun. I very easily could have seen myself placing this number 1 on this list, but the first place specialization is, in my opinion, nearly the perfect choice for this game. Either way, if you find yourself choosing a rogue, I heavily recommend going with the Saboteur specialization. Yep, Champion is the best. We all know it. Some of you might not know it yet, but deep down, I know you know the truth. Much like Saboteur, Champion has no weakness. Well, except for maybe a fire hose. But as far as I know, those do not exist in Thedas. So Champion reigns supreme. Champion is the perfect choice thematically in a game where Darkspawn are the primary enemy type and choosing the Grey Warden backstory is the best for your overall game experience. If you're watching this video without ever having played this game and only have time for one playthrough, I heavily recommend you choose a Champion with a Grey Warden backstory. You will have a blast from minute 1 all the way to the credits rolling. With a Champion specialization, you get to throw shields, have a flaming sword, stab things, burn everything in your path, block literally everything with your shield, launch enemies into the pits of hell, become an unkillable demon, overthrow the Shadow Cabal, transcend through time and space, and finally ascend to godhood. If those things do not sound appealing to you, then I don't know what will. The only thing holding Champion back from being the perfect class on this list is that it is not as giga overpowered as Spellblade, Reaper, or Deathcaller. But I personally see that as even more reason to enjoy the specialization. With Champion, you become extremely powerful without the game becoming a complete snooze fest. The game will become very easy with the right build, but not completely trivial. Champion will still give you opportunities for skill expression, particularly with its ability to block any attack in the game. In my future playthroughs, I will personally be playing as a Champion or Saboteur every time, and if you have not tried them yet, I heavily recommend you do so. That does it for the list. If you're wondering what any of the builds showcased in the footage are, I will have them in the description down below. Please let me know in the comments what your favorite specialization and build for Veilguard are in the comments down below. This also marks the near end of my Dragon Age builds, and I will be branching off to other RPGs. If you have any RPGs you would like to see going forward, I am open to any suggestions. Lastly, if you have any questions for any of the Dragon Age games, I recommend joining the Discord in the description, where myself or someone else in the community will be able to help you out. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.